So I generated this as a starting point just to run through some of the elements of Strategemata, Great Battles of Small Units. You can see here I've just created a quick little sequence of play. The sequence of play essentially are just following activations, but it's quite cleverly worked out, I think, given that we are using a deck of cards to generate things. So you can see there where I've said initial setup as an example. In the Maleme scenario, the German player draws 3 cards, and those suits give the German or give the starting initiative. You're drawing cards for the German player. So let's say you drew a 6 of diamonds, ace of spades, and 5 of spades. You would flip the small counters to show the Germans have an initiative for diamonds and spades. Conversely, the Allies would then be clubs and hearts. At the beginning of any activation, the first thing you do is you draw for whose turn it is. You would draw a card. Let's say it is, I'm drawing a card here, and it's the 3 of spades. So what you would do is, because that is the German suit, or it's shown as a German suit on those 4 little counters, the Germans will have initiative that turn, but you would flip that German spade counter to an Allied spade counter. So next time, hearts, clubs and spades would all yield an Allied initiative rather than a German initiative. So simple, neat, easy to go with. Having drawn for the activation, the next thing you're going to work out is who is going to activate. So the player who has the initiative can automatically activate all the units with the same formation plus any support weapon stacked with those activated units. Again, if we look at the Maleme game, all of the German counters on the map are of the same German formation. So the only reason they would ever need to commit points to activate additional units would be if they wanted artillery fire or airstrikes. Actually, the Germans have no artillery fire in this particular game, but airstrikes definitely. And you can see there just to one side I've said calculate the overall activation cost. It's +1 for a support weapon in a separate hex, +2 for each formation, +2 for each artillery fire, and +2 for each airstrike. So, as we've said, the Germans could just automatically play with all of their combat units on the map, ignoring the air. Conversely, they could pay 2 points for the formation and 2 points for an airstrike to bring air into the equation. But at that point, you need to work out how you think best to generate those 4 points. Now, at the beginning of the game, you will have drawn what I've called on here a command hand. So again, this comes from the scenario setup sheets. In the Maleme again, both sides would have 5 cards. You would look through your cards, see what's in your hand, and you can guarantee your activation is successful by playing a card with the correct value for the number of things you wish to activate. Your alternative is you draw a card from the deck, but if you draw less than the needed activation point total, you forfeit the activation. Nothing happens. Your units just stop, and you're basically rolling for the next activation. So you can see it's quite an important part of the game, making sure that you don't overstretch. And I guess if we think about this in the context of the Crete game, it's how the Germans are going to probably maintain initiative. Or the Brits, or the Commonwealth I should say, are going to be relying much more on piecemeal attacks based on single formations or smaller units. So that's how that works. Flipped over to what I've just called ammo and fire. So this is just kind of running through again a few more of the rules, and just a good moment to kind of stress, obviously, Adam's done a tremendous job with the rules, really. So always refer back to the rules. These are just literally, I created these literally for myself to be a kind of prompt. It's the sort of thing that I usually have a screen above the game that I'm playing, and I can kind of flip through the PDF pages of this to address little things and jog my memory. But you can see here, if we start with the ammo, the marker starts at 0. You will find on the scenario cards a set level. In the Maleme, it is 5 for the Fallschirmjäger and 7 for the Commonwealth. Whenever a card is played with a straight value of 10 in close combat or fire, then the low ammo marker moves up. Obviously, once you reach the designated level, 5 or 7 in the Maleme case, that side can't fire when they have the initiative. So an interesting little mechanic, again, very simple, very quick, brilliant, very good. Moving on to firepower. So you are, first of all, creating the defense value, which is the morale plus the cover. Again, that all comes from the charts. You calculate your fire value by taking the firepower off the counter. Because it's driven by the initiative player, it'll generally be at ×2. You've then got the option of gun and armor rating, which is again just an add and subtract of the gun against the armor to give you a difference. HQ support, obviously, if it's available, you can throw that in, and again that HQ support value can be split as long as it's within range. And then, of course, the random factor is the card draw, which will either be from your hand or from the deck, depending on how desperate the situation is, probably. And the result determines it. So long as it's higher than the defensive value, it's disorganized. If it's double, the target loses 1 step as well as being disorganized. And just a little note there that support weapons, if they are firing, regardless of the attack value, support weapons only ever cause disorganization, never a loss. Defensive fire is slightly different because obviously you, in defensive fire situation, you are not the initiative player, you're the passive player. But it's the same process. You calculate the defense value. Again, which is unit morale and cover. The fire value is, again, that strength point straight from the counter, plus the gun and armor rating, and finally a card value from the deck. And you've got the same basic result system. You know, if it's double, it's a step and a disorganized. If not, if it's just a disorganized. And again, gun and armor rating can affect that fire as well. I've done air artillery in close combat. Air artillery is you draw a card. If the card suit matches the target hex, it's a hit. If it doesn't, it's going to fall into an adjacent hex to tally with the suit on the card. That can be modified. So again, for example, in Crete, you would have there's an interaction with anti-aircraft guns, which cause you to have to draw 2 cards to make it even harder to hit the original target. My understanding is if it's not a hit, it's the other player, the passive player, who gets to determine where the shell lands if there's an option. So that's quite a nice little mechanic. Not for you if it's going wrong, but there you go. There's also a bonus, obviously, because there are signalling units in the scenario that I played through. We never got to see those, but they make it slightly better. Then in terms of calculation, there's a small table which you use to help you calculate the value. Generally speaking, artillery is probably just 1 point. If you have a spotter, then it's going to be trebled, so it's going to be 3 points plus the card, and then again you've got the usual. If it's, as long as it's higher than the defense value, you're going to get it disorganized. Close combat's is a curious one, I think, because it's so much more involved. But you've kind of seen that in the example. Um, Again, it's just a question of following the sequence basically and making sure you draw the cards where you need to draw the cards. Don't forget that if you're already disorganized, you're only drawing one card for the defender. There are bonuses obviously for things like combined arms if you've got tank and infantry. Coordination, which is where if you come in from more than one hex. So, you know, it's a very clever little mechanic again. I mean, all hats off to Adam. He's generated some lovely little simple, but or simple to do and fast to play mechanics, which have a lot of flavour to them, and I quite like that. That's what we kind of ask for, I think, isn't it, in a game? And the sort of cherry on the top, if you like, is this little counter-attack thing, which I've added on the end of here. So as you can see there, if the side without initiative loses, but the difference is lower than the best of his unit morales, you get the counter-attack. So you have this little sub-game that suddenly kicks in. And again, that I think is something that I've maybe not really seen except in, you can obviously do a counter-attack, but this is something that's kind of getting thrown in that turn. So, I guess the argument would go that you might take the position and think, oh, thank God for that, we finally cracked that nut, whatever it was. Only for your opponent to say, yes, but the difference there for you winning was only this, and actually I think we can do better. And they come back and hurl you back out again, and that again is a great little mechanic. I like that. Very nice.